complexes and complexes of complexes to emerge. Every other value of those constants will give rise to a non-anthropic universe, which universe will never give rise to a complexity required for a life form. In our universe, our constants they're described on the sheets, and I can't see the thing, but there's another sheet there that has our various constants there, and you can see them, right? The gravitational constant, the Planck constant, the speed of light constant, the Hubble constant, the cosmological constant, and so forth, the permittivity of space constant. We have 10 primary constants, and then we have an additional 12 derivative constants. Don't mess with the value of those constants. Because given our unit mass for proton, our unit mass for electrons, our unit mass for neutrons, our unit charge for proton-electron, and our conversion of mass to energy in our universe, given that, and given the Maxwell equations, the Boltzmann equations, the Hamilton equations, the Schrodinger equations, and the Einstein equations, given that, and given the mass of our universe, stated either in number of hydrogen atoms or the mass or kilograms, comma, given those three things, those constants have to be pretty much exactly as they are. Or else you will get no life form possible at all. Skip intelligent life. No life form at all. But in any other possible universe, we can go one step further. There will be finite unit masses, or doesn't have to be mass, but finite units of interaction. There will be finite, consistent, repeatable laws of interaction. And there will be a finite amount of mass to interact. And if you take whatever those are, we can calculate the precise value of the constants of interaction given those finite magnitudes through which those constants must operate. And one truth will always be the case. The range which will give rise to complexes of complexes will always be a very narrow window by comparison with the virtual infinity of other possible values of those constants, which will not give rise to a complex necessary for a life form, and therefore will be an insignificant non-anthropic universe. Back to the coin example. Given this, each possible universe in the so-called Planck era is nothing more than the flip of a penny. It doesn't matter how many times the penny came up heads. If the penny is true, then it's still 50-50 that it will come up heads the next time. Similarly, if every possible universe just taken in itself is a virtual infinity to one of being anthropic by pure chance, then it doesn't matter how many non-anthropic universes you have in the complex. Each and every one taken in itself is still a virtual infinity to one in terms of horizon. Now, let me tell you, there's a fourth area that's rather fascinating that comes from this. And that's the whole area of complexity and complexification itself. Because it's not just amazing, right, that we happen to have constants which correspond to our amount of mass, which correspond to our laws of interaction, which correspond to our units of interaction, that just happen to give rise to the complexes, to the complexity necessary for the life form. Our universe did this. Our universe actually produced a life form. Whoa, what does that do to those constants? Right? I'm now shifting the ground. I'm shifting the ground right? It was a very narrow window just to get a complex necessary for a life form. Now I really want a life form. I want a universe that won't just give rise to the complexes necessary for. I want a universe that will actually give rise to something akin to a carbon atom, which has precisely the right amount of resonance necessary for the bonding that will give rise to all the complexes of organic chemistry. I mean, I want something that functions like carbon atom. Now, that, of course, is a very, very, very precise resonance. And that resonance is really a derivative of the weak force in combination with the gravitational force in combination with these other constants, right? So you've got your weak force constant, you've got your gravitational constant, and your strong force constant. You don't want to mess. Now, what happens to the possible range of the weak force, strong force constants and the gravitational constant in their interrelation with one another, in their interrelationship with one another? The window starts to narrow even more. In other words, I'm going way beyond now just getting a complex that's necessary for a life form. I want something like a carbon atom now, and I want the resonance necessary to give rise to those kinds of bondings which will eventually give rise to organic chemistry. That's what I want. The window now of the constants, well, it was still a virtual infinity to 1, but isn't it interesting that it's now like a super virtual infinity to 1? In other words, as you narrow this window, it just becomes so utterly implausible that this universe is going to arise out of pure chance. And it's not just the carbon atoms, but I really got to make sure that the carbon atoms have a chance to function. So now I got to take my weak force constants in combination with 3 other constants, including, by the way, the cosmological constant was just mentioned. It has to have a slightly positive function, right? A slightly positive value. You don't want to have that pop having a negative value. It's going to ruin everything. Because I need the kinds of stars and solar power and water that are required in order for the carbon atoms to function properly and have the amount of bonding materials required to give rise to a life form. So as we begin then to narrow down the prospects, right, of a life form developing by pure chance, the window of availability for an anthropic universe that will not only give rise to the complexity of a life form, but will actually give rise to a life form itself, narrows so considerably that it is an unimaginable virtual infinity to 1. Yet every single one of these things happened in our universe. Ladies and gentlemen, you really have 3 major choices here. And they're choices. There's no question about it. I'm not giving a definitive proof. I'm just offering 3 belief forms. But let's not kid anyone. Belief forms they are. No one is going to be able to say that the denial of supernatural design gives rise to a more reasonable and responsible belief form. It's just not possible given the probabilities of that form arising by pure chance. So what are my options? I mean, given the fact that in any possible universe, you're always going to need these things, and you're always going to have a narrow range, and the range is going to consistently and continue to narrow as I try to put all the constants of complexity together so that they'll give rise to that miracle of the carbon bonding properties, right? As I continue to do that, whatever it may be, carbon or non-carbon element, whatever it is, if I look at that, I've got 3 options. Number 1, I can believe in something akin to a strong anthropic principle. I can believe that there's some kind of guiding force, but it's not God. A guiding force, but it's not a supernatural intelligence. It's right. Whatever it is, it's a guiding force. It's kind of like a final causation of the universe. But whatever it is, it's not intelligent. It's kind of like the future reaching back into the past and whatever. You have faith. That is a ontologically dubious position, but you have faith. You can believe it. Number 2. You have the possibility of believing, weak anthropic principle and many universes notwithstanding, you have the option of believing that a virtual infinity to 1 occurrence, namely an anthropic universe, occurred by pure chance. That's your second option. And you can do it. It's dubious. Remember? It's like, right, the monkey hypothesis, right? You put the monkey in the room, give him a stern admonition, say, I want you to type out the works of Shakespeare perfectly, and I'll be back in 5 years. And then, of course, you leave for 5 years, sliding food under the door, right? And the monkey is typing away at random. That's the point, right? He's randomly typing on the keys and so forth and so on. You walk back into the room 5 years later, there's Hamlet. It's perfect. Right? And there's Othello. It's I mean, by the way, the odds of an anthropic universe developing by pure chance are far greater than this. But there it is, and you sit there and you're confronted by this fact, and you go, whoa, this is highly improbable. But I don't believe anyone snuck into the room and helped the monkey. It just so happened that the random tapping of the keys came out to be this most remarkable pattern. You can believe that. It's a virtual infinity to one, but you can believe it. Number 3, you can believe that there really is a supernatural or some sort of transnatural intelligence that is loading the dice. It's loading the constant dice. It's loading the interaction of constant dice in accordance with the amount of mass, the units of interaction, and the laws of interaction of a particular universe, such that the universe will emerge as an anthropic one, and not just an anthropic one which will give rise to the complexities necessary for life, but will actually give rise to life itself. There it is. I don't see any other options. And the thesis that I would like to hold today is, if really we reconcile ourselves to what is before us and take it with great seriousness, faith is inescapable. But the supernatural designing intelligence, that is at least as reasonable and responsible a belief, at least as reasonable and responsible as a virtual infinity to one emerging by pure chance, or some other ontological paradox getting described to try and get out of a supernatural intelligence, guiding the process along its anthropic way. In order to kind of leave time for some questions here, what I think I might do is, rather than sort of draw out all the consequences of this in terms of teleology or other sorts of things, maybe I'll just go ahead and answer your questions at this time. Thank you very much.
We do have time for questions, and so I'd encourage you to go up to the microphones. And when you're at the microphones, please speak right into it, because sometimes people sort of like this, and so others can't hear. So please come up to the mics and ask questions. And Steve, there's someone behind you who I think wants to. Preference to conference attendees, not speakers. You've had your say, but you may soon.
Oh, no, either way.
Okay. So this isn't on, I don't think, so I'll just talk very loudly.
Okay. That's fine.
My question was, you talked about how you considered, I guess, briefly the possibility of the many universes model, and I think you said that you don't think that's likely to be true, but you posited it.
Yeah, I just assume it for the sake of argument, because
right.
I don't think it has any effect. Yeah.
Okay. And if you did that, and then you talked about it's similar to like flipping a coin, and the odds remain the same for each universe. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if someone could argue that perhaps it's more like a lottery situation where you buy a ticket and the odds are infinitesimally small that you will win. Yeah. But of course, someone wins, and they might believe that there was some design behind it, but really somebody had to win, and so there's no design actually.
Yeah, well, that would be nice if it weren't for the fact that an anthropic universe developing by pure chance. I mean, the odds of a lottery, right? That's pretty small odds by comparison with a virtual infinity to one. Let me try and put it to you another way. One might say the odds of winning a lottery, by analogy here, are about 2 out of 1 compared to a billionth raised to the 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 billionth to 1. Now, you probably want the 2 to 1 odds. In other words, I mean, it's a great, you could make the analogy The difficulty is the quantitative